Hello, Sparkly Beans. Happy New Year, happy 2023. I have a video for you today about our transition from a Lover's Year 2022 to a Chariot Year in 2023, collectively, numerologically speaking. And I have a take that is probably a little bit unique or a little bit niche, that it might be interesting to think through how these themes have shown up for you and how they might be shifting. Before I get started, if you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. One of the tools that I like to use is the tarot, and in this video we'll be talking about the concept of a collective year card. So if you're not familiar with this, you can read all about year cards and different ways to calculate them in the work of Mary K. Greer, but specifically what we're talking about in this video is the idea of a year card for the collective. So this is the year card that we all share based on the numerology of the current year. Of course, I want to be clear that the year 2023 is not a meaningful thing for everyone, that the transition from one Gregorian calendar year to another is not meaningful for everyone. So some folks who, for example, maybe use the Jewish calendar might use the tarot card that would correspond to the numerology of that current year or other systems, but I'm just going to be speaking to this particular system, you know, if you use it, if it's something that is meaningful to you, and what the transition from 2022 to 2023 might mean in the system. I also want to acknowledge, I'm going to be talking here especially about the astrological correspondences with these two tarot cards, Lovers and Chariot. And these are not, absolute correspondences. They're not even, I wouldn't even say like necessarily the best possible correspondences, but they are common ones. I want to acknowledge that they do have a fairly problematic origin, as you may know that in the Golden Dawn tradition, these particular associations are made between major arcana and the zodiac, and as well as it's a mix of both zodiac signs and planets. But it so happens that Lovers and Chariot here are both associated with signs. You know, there's a lot of problematic things about the Golden Dawn tradition, including the rather anti-Semitic use of the Hermetic Kabbalah, which you can read all about in an excellent zine by Ezra Rose that came out last year. You can take a look at that for more information about this. But I do want to acknowledge again that like the particular association actually comes out of a system of correspondences that is rooted in some pretty shitty tradition. That said, the Golden Dawn tradition is the basis for most of the modern tarot decks that exist today, and I think that it is still can be useful to just like ask ourselves questions or use as a bouncing off point if we feel comfortable with it. These correspondences, holding them very lightly and understanding that there might actually be better correspondences, and you might be able to come up with your own personal correspondences between sign and card. But since these are pretty common and it's a frame of reference that a lot of folks are used to, I'm going to use it here, but with acknowledgement of that problematic origin. And let's see, that and then also the numerology itself is its own system that has its own origin. So like all of these things, I always feel as a Piscean person, I'm like, oh, there's like a lot of different pieces that I could easily deconstruct and break apart, but it's actually easier for me to use a structure, even a highly imperfect structure, as a framework for discussion. So that's what we're doing here. Okay, so this is disclaimers aside. If you're not clear on why 2022, 2023 would be Lovers to Chariot, it's just adding up the digits of the year. So 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 2 equals 6. 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 3 equals 7. Corresponding major arcana numbered cards would be Lovers and then Chariot. So we've been in a Lovers year, 2022, and I think in this system lovers associated with the sign of Gemini. I think that the Mars retrograde that we have been going through in Gemini actually has really highlighted and like capped off our lovers year in a very intense way. At least it has for me personally, and I've seen it in collective sense as well. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So the Lovers card, right? It shows us mirrors. It has a lot to do with reflection. It's the first card in the major arcana where we're going through the Fool's journey, and we get to the Lovers, and we've gone from cards where we're looking at a single individual and a single archetype, the Magician, the High Priestess, the Empress, the Emperor, the Hierophant, and now we have two. Now we have the Lovers. And we actually have three people pictured on the card, but I find it, that a big part of the Lovers, no matter what interpretation you use, is about mirrors. So it's the self and the other. You can also look at it as, how you see yourself. A lot of interpretations of the Lovers are actually, it's not really about the other. It's actually about self-love and self-care. It's about reflections of self. It's about what we give away and what we reclaim of ourselves. You can also look at the Lovers as related to choice. And a lot of tarot theorists talk about, it's not really about a relationship. It's actually about choices. It's about alternatives. And I think there is a degree to which the Lovers is about meeting the other. To me, it's about how we see ourselves in the other and see ourselves reflected back to us. I will try to remember to put in the card above, I do have a video about the Lovers card that goes into detail with a lot of different interpretations. I have the same about the Chariot. And so I'll put both of those up in the cards above if you want a deeper dive into each card. But that's the basic sort of thing with the Lovers. So the Lovers actually makes me think of that. There's this trick. I actually use it, like to recommend it to clients a lot. I work with a lot of neurodivergent people, not exclusively, but it's a population I work a lot with. I'm autistic and ADHD myself. I identify as neurodivergent, and one thing that I've found can be really useful for neurodivergent folks who have trouble with the executive function, and specifically with making decisions and deciding which of a bunch of options that we would prefer, is that you can do this kind of forced choice thing, where if someone says that you're doing something, that's when you know what your choice is, right? If you say, do you want X, Y, or Z, you can be like, but then you say, we're doing X, you can go, oh shit, no, I wanted Y. There's a old adage about a coin flip, the point of the coin flip not being the result, but being, when the coin is in the air. I think Diana Rose Harper says this, excellent astrologer. When the coin is in the air, you suddenly realize which option you wanted, right? So the Lovers, I think, to me, has a lot of that energy of, when you're forced to confront an alternative, a choice, a reflection, one interpretation of who you are, and it helps you to ask that question of who am I if I choose this thing, right? And so if you're thinking about the Lovers card and we're thinking about Gemini is a sign that's presenting us with a lot of options and a lot of choices. In the Lovers card, the choice might be indicated by the presence of the other person, of the lover. What does it say about my identity? You can literally think about when you're in a relationship, how does that mold and shift and shape your own identity, or how others perceive you based on what relationships you're in. In a Gemini sense, I don't think that that Gemini is necessarily a sign that you would typically think of when you think about attachment, but I have been thinking a lot in the Lovers year we've just been through about attachment. It's come up a lot for me, maybe it's come up for you, and I think Gemini is about an attachment in an interesting way. I noticed this during, the Mars retrograde in Gemini, that it was kind of a Mars retrograde. Mars has is a sign that, among other things, deals with energy and action and drive. And when it goes retrograde, there can be, it's an opportunity to review, to reflect, to go internally, to think about, where our energy is going. And sometimes if we don't do that, it can come across as like actually like really chaotic energy. You know, there can be this kind of like, if you resist, it'll just blow up. And I noticed personally how the Mars retrograde in Gemini for me was pointing to all the ways in which my energy gets kind of like flung about and latches onto different things. I kept having this visual of like energetic tentacles or like vines kind of reaching out and twining around different things and like holding on. And even if it to other people didn't seem like I was putting that much energy into something, and I wasn't putting necessarily like time into something, I would still have this vague subconscious sense of like my tentacles are out here and they're hooked on to different things. Often that would be like expectation. I noticed myself realizing the ways in which my energy was like wrapped up in expectation or like the possibility of certain things, or like, you know, what if like maybe I expect this relationship to change, maybe I expect this opportunity to manifest, and the ways in which I would grab onto those things subconsciously. I think Gemini, because it does have this kind of, it's the twins, it's different options and choices, it's mutable air, so it's, you know, mutable, like it's about change, it's about flexibility, it's about adaptation, it's about, you know, change, I said already, it's different options, it's shifting from one path to another, and then air is, just as in the tarot and in astrology, you know, has a lot to do with ideas, intellect, socializing, communicating. So I think Gemini, and especially Mars retrograde in Gemini, to me, it was pointing to things like, how do we communicate? What are the different ways that we communicate? What are the perspectives that we consider? The ideas that we consider? You know, what inputs are we getting? Like, how is data coming into our lives? How is information coming into our lives? A lot of us feel really overwhelmed in this time by all the information that we're getting and all the perspectives, and maybe the pressure to be like, okay, I need to like be aware of lots of different perspectives, but then also I'm fucking drowning in information. You know, what do we think will like be the thing? What is the story that we grasp onto, and what are all the other possible stories or interpretations? Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is really big on interpretation. What are all the different interpretations? All the different stories, but also the different interpretations of those stories. How can you take your experience and see it differently, or see the meaning reflected differently, different possible meanings? So you can think about if any of this was coming up for you, especially has been coming up for you towards the end, you know, of the year, as Mars has been retrograding in Gemini in December of 2022. And maybe you've had other examples of how that has been coming up for you. Maybe even like a resistance to, you know, like a desire to, whether you're having a desire to cling on to any particular thing or any particular interpretation or story, whether you're feeling resistance to that, or whether you're feeling like there's so many and I just don't know what to choose. I don't know how to, you know, every few days my take on a situation is changing. It could be very, like make a lot of sense with that astrology. And then again, you can connect that back to the Lover's card of like all these sort of choices and options and reflections you might be getting. But then when we take Lovers and we say it's really about a reflection of ourselves, it's not just about all the different stories, but it's about, you know, where do we construct the self out of that? Do we feel reflected in that? What are the different, like, changing, shifting, mutable ideas that maybe challenge our own perception of ourselves? I think that healthy Gemini energy is going to sample and experiment. It's going to try different things. It's going to taste, right? It's the twins. It's never one thing. It's always, what is the other option? What's the devil's advocate maybe? Or what is the, you know, Mercury is like the jester, the trickster. Like, what is the creative way of thinking about this? The out of the box thinking, the you know, I think I just have one thing, and then Gemini is like, oh no, you got this other thing as well. So that's healthy Gemini energy, is like grab, 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 taste, 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 but doesn't necessarily like cling onto any one thing. And that's where I think the Mars retrograde in Gemini maybe is encouraging us to consider, like, where are we getting identified and attached, and that's how it relates to attachment. I think it has something to teach us about the dangers of identification, the dangers of dogma. So maybe actually like the unhealthy side of the polarity in Sagittarius. This is not healthy Sagittarian energy, but like an unhealthy Sagittarian energy might be like over clinging to a particular belief. You know, this belief at all costs, and not considering alternatives. Having sort of chaos of Mars retrograding through Gemini might have helped or be helping us to highlight where we grab on or cling to things that aren't always working. So, you know, back to the Lovers, it's asking us, what might we not be seeing? And these alternate perspectives coming in to say, ooh, look, what am I not seeing? What feels like the only option, even the only literal lover, and what's another possibility? You know, am I seeing an accurate mirror reflected back at me, or am I seeing a distortion? And do I think that something is for me and it's really not? So that came up for me a lot. You know, noticing, and this had been like throughout the year, but I think especially with that Mars retrograde towards the end, was really intensifying that question of like, what is mine, what is for me, and what isn't? What do I see in this Lover's mirror that I want to claim and I want to hold and I want to say, oh no, it's not just the other, that's actually me. And then like, what is not mine? Because Gemini presents us with all these options, and I think it gives us an opportunity to apply a filter and to discern, and like maybe in some ways to improve our ability to filter, and to, with the retrograde energy of like reflection, to be able to say, I am able to take in a lot of different ideas without feeling like I have to follow all of them. To understand that I'm going to be exposed to, again, that like deluge of information. I'm going to be exposed to a lot of information and perspectives that aren't necessarily invalid. They're just not for me. And that's something that's been coming up for me all year, was like the difference between, sometimes, you know, you can have this like desire or tendency to say like, well, you know, I don't want to invalidate your opinion. Like I don't want to, you know, like your pain is valid. But then like the fact that someone else's pain is valid doesn't always mean that there's a call to action for you. It doesn't always mean that like you need to take something on. If somebody has a particular opinion, perspective, it doesn't mean that you need to, if you're neurodivergent, right? It doesn't mean you need to research it in full. It doesn't mean that you like have a responsibility to dive into every little thing that might be floating by your head. I think Lovers has this kind of looking at the other and then asking yourself, like, is that for me? Is that there actually like a call here that I'm meant to take? And this is going to become really relevant as we move into Chariot. I'll get to that in a second. But like asking yourself, what is mine? What isn't mine? I think the whole Twitter explosion is a really good example of this. And for me, I actually found that it was a big part of my Mars retrograde in Gemini. Was unexpectedly, I went through a whole mental health journey around my relationship to Twitter and my 15 and a half years on Twitter. And I actually deleted my account, put a big red button. 15 and a half years. I've had this account for a very long time. A lot of my life is like tied up in that account. And I realized there were all these distortions, all these like expectations energetically wrapped up in relationships that I thought I had through that platform that I didn't really have, and that the role that it was presently serving is like I would often have a little spark of energy or spark of connection on Twitter and try to grab it and try to attach onto it, right? And my energy got really far flung because it wasn't really building connection. And it's not to say that one could not theoretically build connection on Twitter, although it is kind of on fire presently. But it was more just my personal experience with social media and deciding to like, now I'm not like, I have an online business that's not on social media, a little terrifying. So, you know, check out the link to my newsletter below. That's where you can find out about me now. And obviously here on YouTube. But my experience of that was realizing that social media being such a public, general space, it's not designed for you, right? It's designed to like talk into the void. And I think what, you know, in anybody posts on social media, you kind of have in mind the kinds of people you're meaning to reach and who might be following you. And of course, you're speaking to this like hypothetical audience, but everyone can see it. And I think a lot of the confusion and the misinformation, the communication issues on social media stem from the fact that we're not speaking to a person that we have a relationship with. We're not speaking in the container of context. We're just talking. And we might have assumptions in our mind about how things will be taken, and then somebody takes it a totally different way, and that you know, causes a lot of like friction and pain. And so that was just something I noticed, was that I didn't want to be in that space anymore because it was just so much, and that my particular neurotype, I needed to pull my energy in and to invest in like mutual connections where there is an understanding of the terms of engagement for relationship. Another example is that that came up for me throughout the year was business advice, was going through a lot of, you know, well-meaning and like theoretically on paper aligned to me people giving me advice and talking me through how things work, and realizing that my autistic brain was just not grokking and was never going to grok it. And I think like, you know, realizing that, again, Gemini, like lots of different perspectives, and having this like mirror put up to me, it helped me to see the way my own like autism functions, the way my own ADHD functions, and go, oh, like it's great. It's totally a best practice. I'm sure that works for the majority of people, but again, a majority is just a statistical number. Like if my energy literally can't implement the advice that you're giving, it doesn't matter that it would technically be the most effective way to earn an income. It might be that I have like very specific talents, and maybe I'm able to implement a strategy that others aren't because of a very specific thing that I have, whether that's like a resonance of voice, whether that's an energy with my autism to like go really deep and like do a thing that most people would not be able to do, whether that's, you know, I think one of the like talents that I have in business and like when I serve people one-on-one is that I'm like grabbing from so many different things because of my ADHD. I have a very interdisciplinary skill set that I think speaks to a lot of people because it responds to a lot of people, and especially other neurodivergent people and sort of nerdy people and burnout gifted kids and that like type, quote unquote, type of person. But it does not really jive with any of the advice of like, you know, have a niche, be narrow, do this, do that. And you could make a very convincing logical argument that my way doesn't work. But what does work mean, right? What does success mean? And so that was something I noticed with Gemini and Lover's energy. And maybe you've also this year, you can think of experiences you've had with advice that maybe didn't work for you, or things that logically would seem to make sense, but they were actually showing you a mirror of what you need, like your specific needs, your specific capacities, how you operate. And if you're feeling tension still with something where you're like, oh, I really long for this, but I know, like, but my brain says that can't be possible. Take a good hard look at it, because maybe it can. And if you need support, I will tell you that I do have a link below. You can book, I have neuroemergent human design readings, not just for neurodivergent people, neuroemergent being kind of expansive framework that I use to look at the world. And I'm happy to help you in a one-on-one session. I found that human design, one of the modalities, I can work with many modalities, but one of the ones that I work with is really useful for that kind of like, when your logical brain keeps being like, it's not possible, I gotta do this, I have to do this, and you're trying to separate from that. I found human design to be a really supportive tool in doing that myself. So, small pitch. Check it out below. But yeah, so that's been coming up. Projection has been coming up a lot this year. You know, the realizing the ways in which I might project onto others. And I think that's a big Lover's card. You can think about the ways in which you might be responding, maybe emotionally, to what you see in others, and does that actually reflect something that you need, or a challenge that you have, or a opinion you have of yourself, where you're like maybe criticizing in others something that you're ashamed of in yourself, or maybe you're you could even be, you know, for some people this is like, I'm really like trying to help people in a particular way, and it's because you need that help. Like you would long to be helped in that way. And so you're like, I am being so generous. And you are. I'm not saying you're not, but like, I've had this where I'm like, I am like, why can't people see like I am giving them this thing? And it's like, it's because you're giving them this really niche thing that you need that other people don't need. But maybe if you said you needed this thing, right? So that can come up. But in general, I think this Gemini is just like not identifying with any one opinion, idea, framework, acknowledging that multiple things can be true, you know, acknowledging, of course, my gender is non-binary and my outlook is non-binary, and very much this year, it's been kind of challenging because sometimes you really just want it to be like, here's the truth, this is correct, but like, there's been a lot of this liminality and like, especially dialectics, where like, a dialectic is where two seemingly contradictory things are both true. So there's a lot of that yes and energy. You know, yes, this is true, and I'm like flailing for an example in my brain right now, but like okay, so great one for neurodivergent people, you know, yes, I really want to acknowledge that there's all these like shitty capitalist things around structures and systems, and like, you know, the world is liminal and nothing is certain, and also my brain needs structure and support, and sometimes those same systems, right? Those two things can be true at the same time. That you can think about how that's maybe, what have you noticed this year that has been last year that has been, you know, confronting you to see how two different things can be simultaneously true that seem like a binary. Gemini, by the way, is also associated with the nervous system. It's also associated with the lungs, which being in a post-COVID hell, Mars Retrograde, I'm like, yeah, that tracks. But yeah, the nervous system for this, I would focus on the nervous system. Well, you can think of the lungs, you can do the voice, and we've been talking about, you know, a lot of like social and communication stuff, but also the nervous system. So, you know, I've been noticing with the whole social media thing that like sensitivity was really coming up for me. Sensitivity was coming up a lot broadly for me in my Lover's year. Noticing the ways in which, you know, autistic sensitivity is really highlighted. Noticing the ways in which, oh my God, like I thought I was having a emotional breakdown, but really I was, but like it was actually, there wasn't an emotional problem, it was that there was a sensory problem, and like noticing my relationship to my environment and sensitivity, and like what am I sensitive to, and like where do I not need that poking, like where can I find sensory support. Sensitivity is like pointing me to, sensitivity is not necessarily always bad, by the way. Like the beauty of sensitivity is, of course, connection to your environment, connection to nature, connection to intuition. But like as I've deepened this and as I've been focusing on this, there's also tremendous grief and sadness, and the pandemic is still happening, friends. Let me tell you, not to make it political, but as someone who literally got COVID for the first time in October, found out they were high risk, didn't know they were high risk, now has permanently damaged lungs. The pandemic's still happening. Okay, that was my PSA. But, you know, it was, and you know what's so funny though, is when I got COVID, when I had it and I didn't know it, and like right before my symptoms hit, I think I have it point. With the most sparkly, magical, connected, intuitive nature time. Like I was like vibing with the universe. And that continued to happen as I was going through some of the worst, you know, scariest symptoms. Not necessarily of my life, because I've had like chronic illness and things before, but like in some way, like some of the most scary acute stuff of my life. And I'm like so freaking connected to the universe. I mean, I think it was a great, like, the dual nature of Gemini, right? It was like my lungs are failing, but also, so there's a beautiful things in like sensitivity and reaction and like, you know, if you're, I mean, I've been going through, I'll just be real frank with you, some extreme, like mental health going blah, haywire. Am I okay? Am I going to survive? Like kind of brain panicking. But I'm like, yeah, because I'm keyed into the collective, and the collective is really struggling right now. But finding medicine and supports for sensitivity, so you can think about how, you know, your nervous system has maybe been, if it's been extra activated towards the end of the year, you can think about what themes and patterns that reflects for the full year. Okay, so now though, we're in a new year, we're moving into a new numerical year. So let's talk about I'm spending a little more time on Gemini because actually it kind of builds to something. And so as we move into Chariot Year, we're moving into Cancerian energy. And there's not as obvious, although, wow, irony. I didn't do this on purpose, but literally the moon is going full right as I'm recording this in Cancer. I'm just like, take a breath for that. I'm a Cancer moon, conjunct rising baby, so it's a big deal for me. In fact, I was going to be in community with people on a full moon Cancer call, but you know, I just like felt like I was like, gotta get this out, and here we are. So I'll watch the replay. But you know, right now, we happen to be, as I'm recording this, having a full moon in Cancer, but there's not like big Cancerian themes. It's not a sign that's like particularly emphasized this year, unless I'm forgetting something. That said, it is Chariot Year, and so there's an association with Cancer. So as we move, and I'll put the thing above about Cancer, about Chariot and the Chariot card. But the Chariot is all about our vehicle. It's all about the things around us, right, that support us, that hold us, that like serve as our vehicle. Maybe our armor. You think about the crab shell with Cancer. And what is and isn't going to support us through to our next phase of our journey. Because in the major arcana, Chariot is the end of line 1. You're moving from line 1 into line 2, and line 2 is very much an underworld journey. So you've been going on this journey of like figuring out who you are and like developing an identity, and that's part of that. You know, the Chariot can often like involve identities that we hold. Back to what we were just talking about, stories that we hold, beliefs, labels, roles, all sorts of things, supports, right? Relationships, all these different things that kind of form our vehicle. And some of them may stay, right? But you may find in a Chariot year that you're really like letting some stuff go that you always thought was going to stick around and be true, because it's not going to take you into the kind of underworld, into the dissolving, into the transformation that needs to happen. It could be a job, it could be, you know, there's lots of different things a Chariot could be. And credit, by the way, absolutely to my tarot teacher, Lindsay Mack, I think, especially the Chariot card and that idea of like the vehicle, it really informed by her. So I want to make that clear. But also, yeah, just the general idea of the Chariot being about movement and about transportation. So we have all this data moving into this year that we've gotten from our Lovers Year about what is ours and what isn't ours. And so you can reflect and ask yourself, and we're still in Mars Retrograde, I'm pretty sure, as I record this. So, you know, you can maybe take some reflection, ask yourself over the past year, what have you learned? Maybe what is really hard to confront, right? You might find some supports, do some journaling, talk to supportive people about this. There might be things that are really hard to admit, but like, what is ours and what isn't ours? Well, it was hard for me. I know it sounds very surface level, but like, again, 15 and a half years, it was hard for me to quote unquote break up with Twitter. And a lot of people logically were like, why do you delete your account? You could just not use it. But like for me, I needed an energetic break, and I needed to do that. And that was the thing I needed to do. And like, you know, so only you know like what is yours, what isn't yours. And then like, we've also learned kind of like what might feel like ours, you know, stories we might have, ideas might have, but that are just one perspective. Gemini energy kind of helping us to see that. And so now we're asking ourselves, okay, we've collected all this data, like we're kind of like, let's make a decision, like what serves us and what does not serve us. What is nurturing us? Cancer ruled by the moon. Chariot card has an association there as well. Moon is a big part of the moon, is nurturing, is care. What nurtures us and what does not? What's a supportive crab shell, right? And what's not? What feeds us, and what isn't? Everyone, by the way, has your own moon sign, so you can, you know, the moon sign is often one thing that might point to, help us highlight what we need. Not the only thing, of course. But if you're struggling to kind of intuitively think about it, you could look at your moon sign and what you're getting and what you're not getting that your moon sign might suggest that you need. And you can ask yourself, you know, is your quote unquote crab shell fitting you, or have you outgrown it? Of course, we're all at different places in this Chariot year, and for some of us, you know, have a more hardened shell, and some of us, our shell has already fallen apart. But you can ask, you know, whatever shell you have, is it fitting you, or have you outgrown it? Is your shell, and again, you know, all the things around you, all the supports around you, all the structures around you that may not feel supportive, right? Will that shell move you where you need to go and where you need to be nourished, and where you're feeling a need for nourishment right now? Nourish happens to be my word for 2023. I'm working with that word, nourish. What do you need right now? Moon has a lot to do with needs as well. What do you need? What will help you feel nourished? And nourishing doesn't have to be like sweet and comfortable necessarily. Sometimes we're actually nourished by challenge. Might be what you're needing is actually more of a challenge, but wherever you are, you know, what do you need right at this moment as we move into a new year? And is the shell, the things around you getting you there or not? So like, my realizing I needed very badly, I think, like I'm needing nourishment in the forms of relationship and just like care. And I feel this need to be like held. I mean, literally it is frustrating to be in a pandemic. I can't be physically held, but like, how can I be emotionally held if not physically? And so that was part of my letting go of social media, was like realizing, oh, I need to like clear some space, because I really need to like focus on the relationships, the containers that help me feel held. And that wasn't one of them. You know, even in my business, like letting go of that, because I want to be focusing on my one-on-one work. I want to be focusing on creating workshops, creating spaces. And for my nervous system to do that, like I need to actually like push out a lot of the kind of pressure to market or to do things in a traditional way, so that I can actually show up to the things that are helping me to find my people, to find people who are, you know, who resonate with me. And that includes things like YouTube and my blog. Like long form content happens to be more supportive to me. And that includes things like being able to be present in individual connections, but also acknowledging that something like Twitter for me wasn't really helping me to form those connections, that I need to be present to in order to hear when opportunities are coming through. Now for you, it may be totally the opposite. For you, it may be that you'd be really nourished by having a broader network and having like more kind of random opportunities to connect. And social media feels great. So it's all, you know, personal. But yeah, like what shell do you need for what nourishing you need right now? And like I said, like you may be at different places. So you might be feeling really vulnerable and tender right now. You might be feeling like you don't have a shell. Like you've actually like, you know, everything has fallen off. And I know I felt kind of, some of the Chariot Year stuff has been a little hard for me because it feels like it's calling me. It's like, I had the visual where I was like, man, it feels like I'm literally standing here raw, naked, and bleeding. And someone's just come along to punch me in the chest when they say like, what is not serving you? I'm like, I've done all that. Please give me something that does serve me. So like if you're in that place, you know, the moon has its phases, right? We're all might be in different phases. It's okay. It may be that you may, like me, be feeling like actually everything's fallen off. So my Chariot Year is about rebuilding my shell. It's about finding the shell that works for where I need to go. And it might actually be a really comforting, safe, nourishing shell is what I need right now, right? For other people where your shell is really hardened and you've been kind of coasting on a default and you've been moving along and things aren't quite aligned, but you're kind of scared to make the big leap, it could be that this is the year to make the big leap for you and to make the big change. And to do things that are risky and to push off some of that shell. But if you're like me and you're like, I have literally been making giant changes to my life, I have way less security, way less certainty, you know, way less everything than I did a few years ago, then it's okay. It's okay. I'm saying this to myself too, right? It's okay to be tender with ourselves and like acknowledge that and acknowledge that, you know, it isn't our responsibility to peel off our skin until there's nothing left. The key, I think, to a Chariot Year overall is that it's going to be flexible, it's going to be movable, it's going to be adaptable, it's going to shift. Because it is ruled by the moon. Cancer is a cardinal sign, it's not a mutable sign. It is a beginning, it is a start. But you know what's interesting to me about cardinal energy, and Cancer in particular, when I was trying to understand Cancer, I was like, I don't totally get it. And it's funny because I've got a lot of well, not a lot, but I have two really prominent things in Cancer. I mean, I have my moon on my ascendant, so my chart ruler is my moon, and it sits right there on the ascendant, and it's just like, hey. So if you're an astrology person, you know what I mean there. If you're not, check out the Practical Astrology 101. You can learn about stuff like that. But, you know, I'm just take it from me that I'm very Cancer. It's a really fundamental part of my chart. And so it was funny that I didn't always get it. But I realized that specifically cardinal energy is about creating something, but it has its own, along with mutable, it has its similarity mutable in that there's still a change and adaptability because it's actually going from something that wasn't working, from upset, from disruption, and creating something new from that. So like Cancer, and I want to say this is Diana Rose Harper's Fundamental Needs, what is it called? It's a first house, second house workshop. It's Fundamental Needs, Required Resources. I believe if that may be available right now in a recorded format, it may not be, it may come back live, but like check out Diana Rose Harper's website because it's an excellent workshop. And that was where I actually really started to think through this, was the idea that cardinal water being about creating emotional security or stability. And I was like, I don't know about that. But it's like with Cancer, you have to do that again and again because Cancer is so sensitive and so easily poked that it's like, oop, gotta develop the ability to recreate emotional security where it has been lost. And so in that way, it has that flexibility, right? And so when we're thinking about this Chariot Year, you know, and we're thinking about maybe we've been rocked by some of the sensitivity of the Gemini associated Lovers Year, how do we rebuild? Maybe a keyword for you. How do you rebuild? What do you need to rebuild? And throughout the year, if you're like, oh shit, I thought this was the thing that worked for me, and it turns out it was actually part of the shell that needed to fall away, how do you rebuild from there? How do you create, in Cancer, how do you create emotional security? How do you create a sense of being cared and for and nourished? Because it's two pieces. It's both that you do have, you can't stay in the ill-fitting shell forever, but you also can't stay naked forever. And that's, I think, the medicine of the crab, is that the crab carries its home, and the crab also has to come out of its shell some. And it has to go into its shell some. And so, it's that's the thing about Cancer. We can be very emotionally connected and, one-on-one especially. But, we also need our alone time. And so that's something that may come up for you, having times where you feel more exposed, and then having a balance between waxing moon and waning moon, having a balance between activity and being out there and being extroverted, and then coming into your shell and regrouping and nourishing yourself, I think will be really important this year. You can ask yourself what you've learned about the needs of your nervous system in 2022 from the Lovers. What have you learned about your communication needs? I think I mentioned I've had a lot of revelations about what it means to be autistic, and what that means about, things that I thought I understood, and people I thought understood me, and what wasn't actually there, has been my own kind of version of this. But what is your version? What have you learned about how you communicate, how you relate, your nervous system, your sensitivities, and how can you support those? What do you identify with, and what do you not identify with anymore? And how do you want to prioritize things? And also, what have you learned about the nature of identity being mutable and shifting, and what does that mean for you? If you're trying not to over-attach to things, how can you tell when something is getting a little too attached, and then what can you do about that? So those are my reflections on our transition, our year shift. I would love to hear from you below, what does resonate. You don't know yet what's going to happen in the Chariot year, but in the Lovers year, have you noticed, does my prompts bring up anything? And can you think of anything? If you have any questions, you can leave them below about how would I address this? It might be just some journaling, some reflection, some tarot pulls. You could think about what support do I need? What nourishment do I need? What can I do with this information that I've gotten from the last year? You can also pair with your personal year card. And I don't know, we'll see how long January gets. I may let it go. I may talk about my Lovers Justice combined year and give an example of this. But the collective year energy always pairs with your personal year card. And there's a few different ways to calculate this. So take it with a grain of salt. There are several ways that you can do this. But the way I personally happen to do it is that I do my month, my day, combine all the digits there, however many that is for you, and the digits of the year, get it up to a big number, and then do the combining thing again. So if you get 28, you would be 2 plus 8 equals 10. Okay, now it's 10, right? Until you get to a number that's 21 or smaller. That's slightly different from the way Mary Greer does it, and so you can check out Mary Greer's work. Tarot for Yourself, I know, has it. I think Archetypal Tarot has it as well. But that's the way I do it. And so for me, it will be a hanged year, or I like to call it suspension. And so that's a very different flavor. Suspension, stillness, uncomfortable stillness, paired with Chariot, than, say, Tower, right? And the year transitions at your birthday. And so depending on when your birthday is in the year, you actually, most people, unless you're born January 1st, you're going to get part of the year in one flavor combined with Chariot, and then another part of the year with another. So I'm going to get a little bit of Justice plus Chariot, and then I'll get Suspension plus Chariot for most of the year. So it depends on when your birthday is and what your particular numbers are, but you can do that math. You can leave below if you're I need help. My birthday is October 25th. I'll do the math for you, at least with my method. And I'll tell you what the card is. But you can think about that, what that card might have to tell you about Chariot. But obviously you're going to learn throughout the year. And I really just like I've just done, thinking, recording observations about this, going through observations about this, experiencing observations about this, and, journaling or just tracking it, because it's really interesting to see how it plays out. And I find that actually the year card is one of the most potent teachers for me about that card. I learned more about what the fuck the Justice card is in this past year, and the Lovers card. I expect to learn a lot more about Chariot and about Suspension this year. So that can be, as my teacher Lindsay puts it, a really potent form of field study in terms of, you don't have to read a book. What themes does this year bring up for you, and how you might then relate them back to the card. So that's another invitation. Finally, I will leave a link in the description to, I have a table I created for myself, and I realized it was really easy to just regenerate a share copy. So I will have a Google Doc that has the a table of the cards over time. So because that can be interesting to look back and to consider actually like the cards through time, how the year cards have affected, if you want a little advanced exercise, or even just peek back to the last time we had this particular card, which I don't have in front of me. I could tell you what it was, but yeah. And that can give you some hints what might come up this year. So I'll try to remember to include that resource below. I have a lot about year cards. I love year cards. So yeah, if you have any questions, if there's something you would like me to add on, if this brought up anything you're like, can you do a video explaining this? I would love to. If there's other tarot stuff you'd like me to talk about, other astrology stuff, I'm always open to comments. And do take a quick look at my website below where you can sign up for the newsletter. I would love to have you there. It's really the only way that I'm updating people regularly about my work now that I'm not on social media. But you can also see how to book with me. And so if you want to talk through some of this, I do tarot mentoring. I do tarot readings. I do astrology readings, human design readings, lots of different ways to work with me one-on-one. And in particular, provide guidance to folks who may be neurodivergent or adjacent, or might be to kind of figuring out life with your neurotype. Okay, that's all for now. I'll see you next time.